It's Halloween night, 2011. 18-year-old Taylor Van Diest has decided that this will be her last year of trick-or-treating, and she's going to make the most of it. Taylor walks along the train track so she can meet up with her friend. It's a route she wouldn't normally take in the daylight, let alone in the dark. Almost immediately, she senses something isn't right. Taylor knows she's not alone. And the community of Armstrong, British Columbia will never be the same again. Armstrong, British Columbia is located northeast of the famous Lake Okanagan. It's the commercial center in the North Okanagan region, with agriculture, logging, and ranching central to its economy. It's also well known for hosting the Interior Provincial Exhibition in Stampede, which has been in annual operation since 1899. But it's best known for its dairy farms and its cheese.
Armstrong was pretty quiet. There was very little traffic, so it was a great place for children.
With a population of only about 5,000 people and a single high school, it's a town where everyone knows everyone. Taylor Van Diest is a recent graduate of Pleasant Valley Secondary School. She enjoyed her years there, particularly her music classes. She was involved with jazz, blues, the junior and the senior band. She hasn't made any career choices yet, but she's saving up for a tattoo and excited about getting her driver's license.
The family lived next door to us in Armstrong. Marie Van Diest and the twins. And they were wonderful, just like a couple of young deer springing around. And we have a beautiful big backyard with huge big trees, and I just remember them climbing up the trees. Their wetlands is in the background there, so it's very open and quite beautiful.
It's October 31st, 2011, Halloween, and Taylor has decided that this will be her last year trick-or-treating with her friends. Her twin sister Christy feels too old for it, so this is the first year the two will not be going together.
Kirsty, her twin, was kind of shy and reserved, so they were quite different. Yeah, but they were an interesting support and blend for each other. Fun-loving and gorgeous in every way.
She posts to Facebook asking whether to go as a wood nymph or a zombie, settling on the zombie costume in the end, opting for scares.
Taylor was outgoing and vivacious, very present, very open, and very lovable, very lively young woman.
While some might say 18 is too old to still go trick-or-treating, Taylor is a horror movie buff and a Halloween fanatic. Even though her sister won't be joining her, she's still excited, as a couple of friends are planning on coming along for a night of candy and Halloween fun. She's on her way to Clay's house, a mutual friend, to meet up with him and her boyfriend, who's already there playing cards. Taylor's passion for Halloween is evident in the care that she takes in crafting her costume. She's an expert with the makeup, turning herself into a zombie worthy of the horror movies she loves so much. And for the final touch, she applies her own creative special effects.
So, Taylor is 18 years old. She lives in the small town of Armstrong, BC, and she decides that she's going to go trick-or-treating one last time.
Taylor is on her way to meet a friend on the way to Clay's. She's a prolific texter and responds quickly to friends who know that Halloween is her favorite night of the year. Armstrong isn't the kind of town where you need to be on the lookout for danger. For a young woman like Taylor, it's normal that she would feel safe in her own neighborhood. But she's caught the attention of someone, though she just doesn't know it yet. For some reason, she ends up taking a path leading along a set of train tracks. Taylor's walking alone, and it isn't long before she senses she's not alone. She inconspicuously turns her attention from her phone to get a sense of who's following her. She texts her boyfriend Colton that she's being creeped. He's already at Clay's place playing cards and doesn't notice the text for at least 15 minutes. He notes that she spells creep wrong, which is unusual for Taylor, as she's normally an excellent speller. The misspelling plus the cryptic message is an indicator that something is very wrong. He texts her back. Normally, it's only a matter of seconds before Taylor replies, but this time, nothing. Meanwhile, Taylor's friend is on her way to meet her, but Taylor isn't around. She ends up arriving at the Van Diest home to a surprised Marie. Taylor's mom, Marie, also gets a call from Clayton, wondering where Taylor is. Something's wrong. She tries to keep calm for both of them while they figure out what to do. Finally, she suggests the most logical thing. If Taylor isn't answering her phone, perhaps they should start looking for her. Clay and Colton decide to drive around Armstrong to see if they can find Taylor. Marie and Taylor's friend head out, while Taylor's sister stays at home in case Taylor returns. On her way out the door, Marie dials 911 to report her daughter missing. In most cases, this might seem premature, but Taylor's mom knows this isn't like her daughter. They need people looking for her now.
In Canada, there's no waiting period to file a missing persons report. Anyone who has, close contact or has close knowledge of the supposedly missing person can go to the authorities and tell them their concerns. And once that report is actually made, police are very quick to start looking for the missing person.
Taylor's mom and friend have contacted friends and family to be on the lookout for Taylor while the two search for her. It's almost 8 p.m., about 2 hours since Taylor left home. It's late fall and already dark. The pair of searchers have to use flashlights. Both her mother and her friend trace the path Taylor most likely took. They're disappointed when there's still no sign of her, so they decide to split up and cover more ground. They promise to keep in touch if they hear anything at all. As Taylor's friend is about to take off in search of her, she gets a call from Clay and Colton, who are also out looking. She joins them to search downtown and the skate park. Finally, some news. A teenager is walking by the train tracks along Pleasant Valley Road and finds a cell phone. They aren't able to determine who it belongs to, so they find the home contact on the phone and call it, hoping to get a hold of the owner. Taylor's sister Christy answers and tells them where they can drop it off. The searchers comb along the railroad tracks where Taylor's phone was found. It's dark and hard to see, but it's Colton who sees something obscured in the bush. He pulls back the bushes to find Taylor lying face down, badly injured. It's Halloween, 2011. Taylor Van Diest is heading out trick-or-treating. This will be the first year her twin sister Christy won't be joining her. Nevertheless, Taylor is a huge fan of Halloween and determined to make it a special one. She works hard on her zombie costume before heading out to meet some friends. Taylor walks to her friend Clay's house, hoping to meet up with another friend along the way. But Taylor is not alone. And when Taylor doesn't meet up with her friend or show up at Clay's house, they begin to worry. Those fears are confirmed when a search party of friends and family discover Taylor next to the train tracks, badly beaten and incoherent. Taylor's mom is called immediately, and despite being in hysterics, they manage to give their location. There's a mixture of relief that she's found alive and fear of what state she's in. Emergency services are immediately called to report the incident. It doesn't take long for Marie to arrive. She falls breathless to her knees and holds her daughter in her hands, trying to assure her that everything is going to be okay. Soon after, paramedics arrive and assess the situation. Due to the fake zombie blood, the paramedic isn't sure at first what wounds are real and which ones are fake. But one thing is for certain. There is severe trauma to Taylor's skull, and she needs serious medical attention immediately. Taylor is brought to the hospital where an initial assessment speculates that based on the severity of the wounds and where she was found, she may have been hit by a train. Doctors determine that the hospital in Armstrong is ill-equipped to provide the resources she needs, so she's sent to the larger hospital in nearby Kelowna. The doctor in Kelowna determines that Taylor's injuries are localized primarily to her head, therefore ruling out the hypothesis of a train incident.
There are 6 compound skull fractures, suggesting that a heavy object was used that caused the blunt force trauma. With blunt force trauma injuries, time is of the essence if there is any hope to save Taylor's life.
What these injuries tell doctors is that this was no accident. Somebody did this to Taylor Van Diest. Question is, who? On the morning of November 1st, Taylor succumbs to her injuries and passes away in a Kelowna hospital. The investigation into her assault has now become a homicide investigation.
I was walking down Main Street towards the post office. I met a woman from the art gallery, and she was in tears, and she said, do you know what happened? I said, what happened? And she said, oh, then she told me Taylor was attacked and murdered on the railroad tracks. And I mean, it was just unbelievable, you know, just unbelievable. What? That can't be, it can't be the truth. It was like the antithesis of the whole spirit of Armstrong, that anything that horrific could happen, and that it did happen. And we had to accept it and do what we could.
The forensic pathologists that performed the autopsy on Taylor confirmed that the 6 compound skull fractures was the cause of death. The level of brain trauma indicates that there was no way that Taylor could survive these injuries.
She also notes lines around Taylor's throat, indicating that some sort of ligature was used to choke her. The bruising on her arms suggests Taylor tried to fight off her attacker. Lastly, the doctor discovers blood and tissue under Taylor's fingernails, likely from her assailant. The doctor clips the nails and carefully collects the samples to be tested.
The tissue that was found and retrieved underneath her nails could provide a DNA sample from her attacker. If her attacker is already in the DNA bank, this will tell investigators who the suspect may be.
With Taylor's death now confirmed as a murder, police canvass the neighborhood bordering on the train tracks to see if anyone remembers anything out of the ordinary the previous night. An officer speaks to one woman who remembers hearing screams at roughly the time Taylor was attacked, but she didn't think anything of it at the time. Given the date, she chalks it up to Halloween antics. While police canvass the neighborhood near the crime scene, they simultaneously go public with the news of the killing and release a photo of Taylor in her costume from the previous night that she'd posted to Facebook. They hope that the photo will jog someone's memory and provide a break in the case, because so far, they have 0 suspects.
In a small town where police go canvassing door to door looking for information, there's a benefit to that because everyone in the town is aware of everyone else to a certain extent. So anything unusual is likely to come out in this type of canvass.
Police close off the area around the crime scene. They're thorough in their search for clues, hoping to find a murder weapon or any piece of evidence that may point to whomever the killer or killers may be. Unfortunately, their search doesn't turn up anything useful. In the town of Armstrong, tensions are high. Residents know that there's a killer at large.
There was a tension, you know, a horror and a tension to which people felt, and understandably, children did not walk to school on their own. It was then parental supervision for a long while after that. It destroyed the trust that we had had in the community before that. It was just unimaginable.
For all they know, it could be someone from the town, someone they know. They grow wary of each other and fear that they or their loved ones could be next. The sooner police can apprehend Taylor's killer or killers and bring them to justice, the sooner this small town can begin healing. But for now, it's not the inviting, neighborly town it was only 2 days ago. Taylor's murder has affected everyone. On the morning of November 1st, 2011, Taylor Van Diest dies from her injuries in a Kelowna hospital with her family and friends by her side. The entire town of Armstrong, British Columbia is shaken by the devastating loss of young Taylor. The thought that a murder could take place in their tight-knit community is incomprehensible, and yet they don't even know the grisly details of how she was killed. On November 3rd, police hold a press conference to announce that they don't have a suspect at this time, but that they're looking for anyone with information to come forward and assist in the investigation. They also state that the details of the murder are being purposely withheld to protect the integrity of the case.
What unfortunately happened is the investigation can be saddled with information that all needs to be looked into. It's quite common for police and investigators in general to not reveal all details of a case. They call it holdback information. and it's for a very specific reason. If somebody was to phone in with a tip, if they were to be aware of small details that were never released publicly, the odds are that the person providing that information has knowledge of what occurred. So if they were to just release all the details, anybody could phone in and anybody could supposedly leave a tip that would have to be investigated, and it's a waste of investigators' resources, really. If somebody was to phone investigators with a tip, police are able to compare that information with the small details that were never released to the public. This would be a good indication that the tipster has intimate knowledge of what they're investigating.
So far, only the pathologist, a few detectives, and the actual killer or killers know how Taylor was murdered. This news is devastating to the town of Armstrong. It raises more questions than answers and provides no comfort for a grieving community. With the killer still at large, everyone is a suspect. On the 7th of November, the town of Armstrong rallies together in Taylor's honor. A community arena is used for the memorial service in order to house the sheer number of people who come out to pay their respects.
The National DNA Data Bank contains more than 500,000 DNA profiles. This database can help identify human remains and solve crimes.
On November 11th, investigators get their first break in the case when the results from the DNA test come back, although the results are inconclusive. The lead detective on the case calls the lab to get more details. Unfortunately, according to the lab work, the DNA pulled from under Taylor's fingernails does not come up in the known offender data bank. If it had, investigators would have the ID of their lead suspect. What the DNA does reveal is that it's a match for DNA found in an unsolved sexual assault case from 2005 in Kelowna, BC. In the 2005 case, the young woman who was assaulted is able to provide details of her attacker, a description of his face, his height, his approximate weight. A police sketch artist is then able to produce a composite of the perpetrator based on her description. And while no one is ever arrested in that case, Kelowna police are able to provide the composite sketch to Armstrong investigators with hope that it will aid their search for Taylor's killer. Investigators in the Van Diest case may not have a name to go on, but now they have a face. They're optimistic that someone will recognize the composite sketch and come forward to ID the killer. Police update the public with the new lead in the case. They share that the DNA found under Taylor's nails matches that of the attacker in the 2005 Kelowna assault case. And while they don't have a positive ID yet, they do provide the composite sketch of the man. The detective describes him as a Caucasian male with darker skin tone, now 25 or 26 years old, brown eyes, between 5'8" and 5'10" in height, of stocky build but not muscular, with thick eyebrows and sideburns.
Well, in a murder case where a victim has fought back, the perpetrator or the suspect may have defensive wounds such as scratches or cuts, bruises, particularly in areas that can't be concealed. This may result in them having to change their routine or act somewhat differently than they would normally act for the purpose of concealing those injuries. They don't want people to see them with sudden injuries that they can't explain.
The composite sketch may lead to a break in the case for investigators, but it's a demoralizing blow to the Van Diest family and the community. The killer is still out there, unidentified, possibly in search of his next victim. A sense of mistrust and fear simmers in the town of Armstrong. People are afraid to walk the streets alone. They travel in pairs or seek the safety of their cars.
There was a tension, the horror and a tension that children did not walk to school on their own. It was then parental supervision for a long while after that.
Over the ensuing months, there are 1,250 tips called in pertaining to the Taylor Van Diest case that amount to 0 leads. That's a staggering number of tips given that Armstrong's population is only about 5,000. It's a clear sign that the community has lost its sense of trust.
High-profile murder cases often generate tips from all over. Everybody wants to try to be helpful to investigators. But what can unfortunately happen is the investigation can be saddled with a whole flooding of information that all needs to be looked into, whether it's actually germane to the situation or not.
Meanwhile, Taylor's friends and family are grieving, unable to heal from the wounds of her loss because her killer or killers are still out there. Investigators see a disturbing pattern emerging with their unidentified primary suspect. His first recorded attack was a sexual assault. His second escalated to murder. There's no question in their minds that they are in fact dealing with a serial offender.
If a person who has committed assaults in the past has now effectively graduated to murder, is there a possibility that they're prepared to do it again?
Then, in December of 2011, several tips from nearby Cherryville residents pique investigators' interest. A number of people claim that the composite drawing looks exactly like someone they know, named Matthew Forrester. When detectives go looking for Matthew in nearby Cherryville, they're met by his father, Stephen, who claims Matthew's been gone for months, working in the Alberta oil fields. They ask him if Matthew was around on October 31st, the night of Taylor's murder. Stephen claims that Matthew was already gone by then. Investigators dig deeper into Matthew Forrester's dad, Stephen. They find that he has a lengthy criminal record dating back to 1969 for auto theft. His rap sheet is long and includes drug convictions, escaping custody, and possession of a restricted weapon. Investigators are suspicious of Stephen and aren't convinced his alibi for Matthew holds up. Based on these suspicions and the multiple tips linking Matthew to the composite sketch, they seek to obtain a search warrant for Matthew's cell phone record on the night of Taylor's murder. Stephen claims Matthew was working the oil fields in Alberta the day Taylor was killed. But what will the evidence reveal? On October 31st, 2011, Taylor Van Diest was excited to go out trick-or-treating for the last time. At 8:45 p.m., Taylor's friends find her not far from the railroad tracks, badly beaten and clinging to life. Investigators get their first break in months in the Taylor Van Diest murder case. Several residents of the nearby town of Cherryville call in tips stating that they believe the man in the composite drawing to be Matthew Forrester. But when investigators go to interview Matthew, they meet his dad, Stephen, who informs them that Matthew has spent the last few months working in the Alberta oil fields. Investigators aren't convinced of Matthew's alibi, so they obtain a warrant for his cell phone records. The record shows that on October 31st, Matthew's phone pinged a tower in the nearby town of Lumbee, and then later in Armstrong. His phone indicates he was in Armstrong at the time of Taylor's murder, thereby contradicting the alibi Stephen provided for his son. Having obtained a sample of Matthew Forrester's DNA, the lab analyzes it, and the results show investigators that Matthew's DNA is a match for the DNA found under Taylor's fingernails. It also matches the DNA from the unsolved assault from 2005 in Kelowna.
DNA profiling is the gold standard in forensic science, and it is 95% accurate.
This confirms their suspicions that Matthew Forrester killed Taylor Van Diest. But the question remains, where is Matthew Forrester? Investigators don't believe that Stephen's going to give his son up willingly, so they dig deeper into his activities. What they discover is that he paid a man who looks similar to his son Matthew $500 for his British Columbia Automotive Association card, driver's license, an expired bank card, and his social insurance number, telling the man he'd only need the items for a few months. With this evidence, investigators confirm that Stephen is aiding and abetting his son Matthew. Investigators learn that in early November, Matthew leaves his apartment and requests his damage deposit from his landlord. But the landlord has no idea where his current address is. With Stephen's refusal to aid the investigation and the confirmation that he's aiding and abetting his son in avoiding capture, investigators seek to obtain a warrant to tap Stephen's pay-as-you-go cell phone with the hope that he's still in contact with Matthew and can lead them to his location.
In order for investigators to obtain a warrant to install a listening device, such as a wiretap, they would need to show that they have reasonable and probable grounds that an offense has been committed or is about to be committed or is being committed. Without those reasonable and probable grounds, the judge wouldn't grant a warrant.
The wiretap confirms their suspicions. Stephen is definitely still in contact with Matthew, and he's worried that police are poking around. He tells Matthew to lay low and lets him know that if the police knew where he was, he'd be in custody already, reassuring him he's safe for the time being. The next few months have investigators listening in on a number of calls between Stephen and Matthew. Unfortunately, the pair seem careful not to give away Matthew's whereabouts, leaving detectives little to go on. They could execute an arrest warrant on Stephen, but they fear he won't give Matthew up, and they could lose him forever. Their best bet is to continue with the wiretap, with hope that the two men slip up and reveal information that could lead to Matthew's whereabouts. Then, in late March, Matthew and his dad slip up, stating over the phone that Matthew is living in Collingwood, Ontario. The detective learns that Matthew has been working at a glass factory there using the fake ID his dad got him. After months of looking for their prime suspect, finally, they've tracked him down. Police in Collingwood cooperate with investigators in Armstrong, obtain a warrant, and arrest Matthew in his motel room. Simultaneously, Stephen Forrester is arrested in his Cherryville home. Matthew is flown back to BC to speak to investigators there who are eager to get some answers. But given how unhelpful Matthew's father has been, they can't help but wonder, will Matthew cooperate?
When I heard that they had arrested this young fellow who apparently had the DNA that matched, I was really, really relieved. I have a stack of newspapers that I've kept to this day that have recorded all of the events and arrests, and his father had allowed him to be in the house without notifying the police, so he was also an accessory after the fact, I guess you call it.
With Stephen Forrester in custody, Investigators now have the opportunity to get a confession from him with hope that he'll implicate his son Matthew in the murder of Taylor Van Diest.
An accused person has the right to be silent while they're being interviewed by police, and any defense lawyer is going to tell the person that they've spoken to that they should be invoking that right and should remain silent. However, that doesn't mean the police can't keep trying and can't keep interviewing them.
But Stephen continues to be obstinate, and even when shown the facts of the case, refuses to give detectives anything useful. Stephen is put into a holding cell, and after a while he speaks candidly with his cellmate, telling him he'd take the blame for the murder if he could, but he can't because he was in Alberta when it happened. Stephen describes to his cellmate how he helps Matthew get a new ID and instructs him on how to evade police capture. What Stephen doesn't realize is that he's giving a confession to an officer undercover.
In the United States, Miranda rights are what guarantee an accused person their right to silence and their right to counsel when they're under interrogation. In Canada, our legal rights are protected by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So the Charter of Rights and Freedoms also guarantees an accused person the right to silence as well as the right to contact counsel when they're under arrest. However, unlike in the United States, an accused person is not permitted to have a lawyer present with them while they're being interviewed unless they're a youth. In this situation, Stephen is giving his confession to an undercover officer posing as his cellmate. So Stephen isn't actually being given his charter rights here because he doesn't know that he's making a statement to an officer. Now, normally statements made to another person, so hearsay, are inadmissible in court. However, confessions are an exception to that rule. So if you make a confession to anyone, that person can testify in court about what you told them.
So far, all the evidence points to Matthew as the killer. But given how uncooperative Stephen has been, the detective doesn't expect Matthew to give up a confession right away. But this doesn't worry him. Piece by piece, the detective lays out the evidence for Matthew. Lab reports with his DNA on Taylor, and Taylor's DNA found in his truck. Cell phone records showing he was in Armstrong the night of the murder. Witness reports attesting that Matthew matches the description in the composite drawing. And finally, wiretap records from his phone calls with his dad. At first, Matthew doesn't show any signs that he's worried, shrugging off the detective's evidence. But after hours of being interviewed, Matthew finally sees that there's no way out for him but to confess. He cracks and gives details on what happened on the night of the murder. Matthew claims he came to Armstrong looking for sex. He spent the afternoon driving around looking for a victim. At approximately 5:45 p.m., he spots Taylor leaving her home. He parks his truck, gets out, and follows her at a distance. Matthew maintains a distance of about 100 feet between himself and Taylor, observing her as she texts. He notices that she slows down and glances back briefly, a sign that she's aware of his presence. She continues walking, and he picks up his pace. He narrows the distance between them and calls out to Taylor. She turns cautiously to face him, her cell phone in hand. He laughs and cracks a joke, complimenting her costume, an attempt to put her at ease. Suddenly, with her guard temporarily down, he charges at her. Taylor turns to run, but he hits her in the back of the head with a large metal flashlight. They struggle in the grass, and Matthew wraps a shoelace around her throat, tightening it. Taylor claws at his hands furiously, fighting for her life. She crawls towards the bushes, screaming for help, but Matthew is on her instantly. He hits her over the head 5 times with the flashlight. Satisfied that no one has heard or seen the assault, he drags Taylor into the bushes and hides her there, leaving her for dead. Matthew Forrester finished his confession by stating he was only going to rape Taylor, and if she hadn't fought, he wouldn't have killed her. he's clearly remorseless.
In a case such as this, victim blaming wouldn't necessarily be uncommon. For the perpetrator of an attempted rape to murder their victim, they would often say something like, if she hadn't fought back or just let me do what I wanted to do, I wouldn't have had to have killed her. Well, in Taylor's specific case, because she fought back the way she did, the result was that she was able to ultimately identify the person responsible for her murder even after her death. The DNA that was captured as a result of the struggle identified the suspect in the end and may have prevented somebody else from suffering the same fate as well.
Matthew Forrester's case goes to trial, and with his confession, he's found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for 25 years.
Matthew Forrester is convicted of first-degree murder. In Canada, first-degree murder carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the eligibility of parole for 25 years. So that means that before he can even apply for parole, Matthew has to serve at least 25 years of his sentence.
Matthew's dad, Stephen, is tried shortly after his son and is sentenced to 3 years minus time served for helping his son evade capture by police. In 2017, Matthew is granted a retrial due to the jury in his first receiving improper instructions. But no trial is necessary. In 2018, he pleads guilty to second-degree murder and is sentenced to 17 years in jail. For the town of Armstrong, there's an enormous sense of relief that the killer has been caught and a sense of justice that he'll spend the rest of his life in prison, unable to inflict any more harm on young women. For Taylor's mom, Marie, nothing can replace the sense of loss. Nothing will bring her daughter back. A 185-meter trail has been created with land along the tracks where Taylor was found. The Taylor Van Diest Memorial Trail features figurines and, at its halfway point, a gazebo with benches surrounding a memorial to Taylor. It's become a treasure in the city, a treasure paid for at an unacceptable cost.
I remember organizing a walk on Halloween the following year in memory of Taylor Van Diest. We had a candlelight walk through the streets of Armstrong. It was sort of a way of commemorating her, but also honoring her and the family. Marie dedicated herself to that creation, and the community, of course, were completely supportive towards her. The dedicating this trail beside the railroad tracks.
Today in Armstrong, Halloween marks a day where the community honors Taylor, remembering her and her fondness for the holiday. It's a bittersweet mix of pain from the loss of innocence, but also a time to cherish the memories that Taylor's life brought to so many in the town.